Welcome, episode 3, the Keeping It Real pod. I'm your host, Harry Zikos. This is my partner, Mike Falchiere, partner in business.
What's going on, people?
So this is going to be a fun little topic because this hits close to home for a lot of New Yorkers. We're talking about the FARE Act, the F-A-R-E Act, if I'm not mistaken. This is a new piece of legislation that was voted with a supermajority in the New York City Council. Basically, it's changing on how landlords and their brokers charge tenants. And we're going to give a little real estate broker reaction to this. Lifelong brokers pretty much in this game. And, sometimes there's a perspective on this that's interesting to look into. All right, Mike, take us away. What did this law bring about? What are we looking at here as consumers and agents?
So I think the first thing to say is Harry and I are both not attorneys. So any legal advice, please, consult an attorney about this. But our understanding of the FARE Act, it was passed on November 13th, 2024. So, about a month ago. And, it stands for the Fairness in Apartment Rental Expenses Act. And to make a long story short, the idea is whoever hires the broker for a rental, whether it be the tenant or a landlord, that should be the person who ends up, paying the broker's fee if there is a broker involved in the rental. And pretty much, they feel like there were forced broker fees before this act was passed on. And, a lot of the time that was the case. There were good rentals that, brokers might be gatekeeping or charging, crazy broker fees on. And it was preventing people from, getting an apartment they wanted. So I think, that was the biggest thing. Our team doesn't really work that way. We sort of are, at least I tell our brokers to work with clients on, working on fees and getting them into units and things like that to not be a blockade. But a lot of the time that seems to be the case. And, that's the story of the FARE Act. And, people have been talking about this for a while, but I think one particular scenario or instance happened up on the Upper West Side. I think this was back in 2023. There was a rent stabilized apartment that, was around $2,000 a month. And this broker ended up charging somebody like a $30,000 broker fee. And it made headlines everywhere. It was all over the place. And I think that was the tipping point for people saying this is ridiculous.
Is that guy still in business?
I have no idea.
I don't even know the guy's name. He might not be in business much longer.
Yeah, but that's sort of what started it. And that's what's going to happen. And people look at it both ways. Some brokers are pissed off about it that I know, and, others aren't too worried about it. I'm the one who's not too worried about it. I think there is, this is good for the market in general. I think, having the traditional broker's fee too, if people aren't familiar with it, the traditional model that brokers try to get away with is charging 15% of 1 year's rent.
That's 1.8 months. If you're lazy with doing the 15% calculation, 1.8 months.
Extra rent.
Exorbitant amount of money for a lot of people.
Yeah, so you have that, and then you have 1 month's full rent usually due at signing, and then a 1 month security deposit. Right. So you're almost looking, if someone's charging a full 15%, you're looking at potentially almost 4 months worth of rent up front. Now, if the tenant's not hiring the broker, their upfront costs are going to decrease by, around 40% now potentially, which is a huge barrier for people getting into the rental market. Huge. So, that was never our case. We've never charged a 15% on our side, right? So I think that's different. And I think now it shifts it. I think the brokers had that ability because they were signing exclusive agreements with landlords or owners who weren't paying the brokerage fee. So they didn't care what the commission percentage was, versus, brokers who were working with landlords to begin with, like ourselves. Right. And if it's a landlord who's paying the fee, they're going to look at it more and they're going to shop around and be like, all right, I'm not going to get exploited for, 1.8 months rent to get my apartment filled here. I'll go work with a broker who's willing to work with me. Or like a lot of these larger, offices have done is they've brought the leasing in-house.
Oh, that's like you name any major shop with several thousands of apartments in their holdings in New York City, they're doing in-house, and they're hiring talent
I
to
wouldn't
go
say
tour
all.
a la carte.
I wouldn't say all of them, but most of the, corporate institutionalized for sure.
TF
I think,
Cornerstone is an example I'll use,
yeah, I
or
think
Rock
some of
Rose,
them,
you know?
I think some of them outsource it for liability purposes, not having to pay the payroll, the health insurance, all the extra cost that comes with it.
Yeah, for
So I
sure.
think it's also a balancing act. I also do think for the ones who, have the more traditional, newer model of, building a traditional rental building, they own the whole thing and they have a leasing office downstairs. I think that makes it a little bit easier as well. But, for some of the ones that we work with that, have thousands of units on, their portfolio, but aren't institutionalized or, let's say that way, right? They've kept everything
Family
within the
owned.
family owned, yeah. It's a little bit different where, they don't own the whole building. They own unsold shares within the buildings and they're scattered across the 5 boroughs. And, it's not as easy to operate a leasing office
And it's
in-house.
logistic heavy, with that much territory, and you don't have 1, 2, 3 centralized large scale projects.
It's
The
hard.
management component is completely different. These large scale buildings will have a management component built into the structure. Like, this is the management office, this is the leasing office, this is where you have like all the staging points for the building staff. I'm actually a fan of this new legislation because it's creating a conversation around something that is not really looked at in comparison with the rental convention of the rest of the country. What do I mean by when I say this? If I went and decided to move to Miami, Florida, like I once thought I wanted to in 2021, right? I did research, called a broker, had some, hey, work with me, whatever. This is what it was going to cost. It was going to cost the same amount of money almost. You were going to come up with security deposit, which is like ubiquitously nationwide for the most part, a month's rent. So 1 month security, first month's rent, last month's rent, and then any application fees or whatever processing fees that some third party middleman entity will try to extract. Okay, cool. But in Florida, they don't charge more than 1 month's rent, even if there's 2 agents, even if there's an agent for the owner and an agent for the tenant. So like that's where I think the conversation needs to really dial in on the market to create a market-based solution where you can still be competitive, charge a fair commission, but then not like sit there, make everything about this one-time fee that is not supposed to be negotiable. I mean, like some firms make it a thing to not negotiate these 15% fees, and people build their entire business on this model. You and I don't like that because we're pro landlord. I want my clients to say, hey, like my broker never charged more than a month's rent because a tenant came to them directly, or charged a little higher if there was 2 agents or something like that, than to deal with what's the alternative. And you fall back on some guy keeping a vacancy because he was trying to collect a 15% fee for a long period. And, he kept it vacant for 2 months because he wanted to try to charge his fee, and he got, a lot of the market turned off. So like that type of anecdote is very common, especially in like Brooklyn, Queens, like these like tier B neighborhoods, like workforce housing, but like, gentrifying still, you know what I mean? Like that's what's out there. So that's my quick take on it. But, it's going to bring the conversation back. It's going to bring the conversation back on the subject. People get to say, okay, well then what's fair? What's not fair? What is expensive? What really justifies a fee of this size? Okay, a co-op rental package to submit to a board. Yeah, I would pay a 15% fee there. What about you?
15% fee for what? To not have to?
For doing a co-op rental. Like if I'm hiring, let's say if I have a rental and I have to submit it to a board, and I have like a 95-page dossier that needs to be filled out to submit to a management company to then get a board response on a rental, like that, I can understand why, you would want to charge a higher commission,
This has nothing to do with wanting to charge a higher commission. The argument that the
right. But like
law is stating
that's
is
where I hang in there for the broker. I'm like, okay, maybe that one type of deal type, because it's so work intensive, maybe then you earn more,
it has nothing to do with earning more. It's a question of all they're saying in the act is if I'm a renter and I'm not hiring the broker, why am I paying the broker fee? So
Right.
you can go do all that work. No one's arguing. It's between you and your client, though, to agree that, hey, so you have to go, if you're working for the landlord, you have to convince them that you're worth 15% now.
Exactly. Like that needs to
And
be the
then you have to go
conversation.
convince a renter that you're worth 15% or whatever you're going to go charge them.
Yeah.
And that's where the conversation is. That's what the argument's been all along. It's
But
been
it wasn't there
forced.
before, Mike. What do you think about that like just because like how many times have you heard people telling you this story? Like let's say you and I are just charging a month's rent on one of our landlord work deals and we're having somebody tell us I've had people tell me experiences working with somebody who was not going to negotiate 15%.
Yeah, of
They
course
found
not.
them on Street Easy. The agent was advertising the unit, likely had an exclusive, and they was like, "Yep, sorry, we can't budge, 15%. Sorry, corporate policy, brokerage policy. I can't do anything about it. I'm just an agent." They give all the excuses on and not being able to negotiate the fee. Like, how can the agent who's orchestrating all of the effort not be able to negotiate a fee is beyond me. But some firms have restrictions on this, and I get it.
Some of them don't want to. It's
Well,
a
that's why,
it's an
like,
argument of if you start negotiating with your fee and now they give you a referral, hey, go work with Harry because guess what? I'll tell you, he's going to tell you he's going to charge you a month, but you can get a half a month out of him. Don't you worry. And now your business has been discounted forever.
right. But at the same time, there's a competitive negotiable aspect of what people should charge their client. There's a market component, and this is the chance for that to actually happen. So who knows? So is this going to be a problem for the smaller landlord, Mike?
I think it depends on the type of product you have. For example, I think this helps the renters. It's a big win for renters in the case of now my upfront costs are almost half, right?
Yeah.
Traditionally,
Yeah.
let's say your upfront costs are anywhere from 25 to 40%, roughly 40% cheaper now. Depending on if a broker fee was 8% to 15% or more of a rent. But on a free market apartment, at the end of the day, I had clients that we work with that this type of legislation was discussed, I forget, maybe a year, 2, 3 years ago at one point.
Right.
And in response to that, we started testing some of our product as no fee, where the landlord started paying it. And on certain product, it makes sense because we actually were getting higher rents, right?
Yep.
And it was less friction to get the apartment rented. So yes, the owner was coming out of pocket to, get the apartment rented, but they're getting a higher rent roll, which is better with the banks always, right? On your renewals, your renewal basis is higher too. A broker's fee is one time. So I do think it's a win for everybody for now. I think, yes, upfront costs are down. I do think rents on free market apartments could go up a little bit in the short term to offset this. I think, it'll be interesting to see what happens with apartment renewals as well, right?
Let's go into that.
Because, well, on two bases, right? The first basis on the renewal is, a lot of it's tricky, right? Because now I'm a landlord. I don't want to, from a landlord's perspective, I don't want to lose a tenant, right? I do a lot of renewals with one of our bigger clients on a lot of their product that's free market.
Right.
And a lot of the time we sit there and when we analyze it, we say, okay, on average, how many days does an apartment in this building sit vacant when we turn it over? What do we need to do to it? Is it a full renovation or is it just a paint and clean? And we take that cost into account. What's the brokerage fee going to cost, right? What's the increase in rent or the decrease or whatever it may be compared to the previous rent? And we take that all into account when we're doing, an increase. A lot of the time, though, when landlords, big or small, we're looking at these increases, one big factor they took into account not was just the moving cost of hiring a moving company, but it was, brokerage fees for a new apartment a lot of the time.
It's huge,
And if
actually.
that's
Yeah.
eliminated, it's eliminated a lot of the time, right? Because a lot of these bigger institutions have gotten away with the broker fees, right?
Yep.
It's more of your smaller, I'll quote unquote say affordable housing, right? In the pre-war buildings and the walk-ups and stuff like that. That's more for shares and things like that. I think that could be an issue, but I do think the landlords are going to look at their renewal process a little differently now. And might not be able to do as high of increases, right? Because there is one less cost for a renter when moving. And I think it's the same thing for a renter too, right? Is hey, when I'm looking at increases or looking to upsize apartments now, that one less cost is huge in making that decision. So I think it will be interesting to also see, does the average renter stay in their apartment for less time now because there's less cost of moving?
I disagree they would, but I think that's a function of the
Well,
current rental market.
people don't like to move, and a lot of the time, most of the reason people, in my experience, move, right, is they're either getting relocated for a job, and that's just a function of that. They've outgrown the space, right? They've met a partner, they've expanded their family, whatever it may be.
Yep.
Need home office after post COVID, whatever it could be. And a lot of the time they look for something within that building, and the jump from a studio to a one or a one to two, the price is too much, so they get outpriced of the neighborhood, right?
That happens more than ever right now.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
sad. Very sad. We need more supply, folks. That's the only way this ever gets solved.
So I do think it's
Yeah.
decent. And then I think the only area that, so we'll see if the renewals stay. And then if people are renewing less, right, it's a function of, hey, is that just because of broker fees? And now the owners, a lot of owners might consider bringing leasing in-house if that becomes the case. If I'm constantly having turnover every single year or every 2 years on every apartment, it might be more cost effective to hire somebody on salary, send them around, and pay for their benefits.
Depending on how much they have in vacancy, it
Yeah,
might make sense. You make
but it
that
depends on the
decision.
logistics. And as my personal opinion on this, why, I personally don't have any of our brokers on more like a, quote unquote salary or fixed, payment structure is all the incentive and, urge of,
Getting the job done.
is not there anymore. So, they're not gonna, if I'm on a salary and there's no incentive to work harder and longer, like not gonna go do those showings at 8 a.m. on the weekend, if I was out late on a Friday night or missing Sunday night or Sunday football, So it's gonna be interesting to see. And I think the one thing, the rent stabilized housing is going to be interesting. The apartments that, people move out that are, already below market. The owners aren't getting increases, but they need to do things to fix them to get them to be to a rentable condition.
Do you know?
And
I have a thought and a theory about this. I want to run past you. I think that particular, like, really very underpriced, but somebody's still renting it in the shadows. I think those are where you're going to see a decent size amount of people willing and seeking out brokers who have these quiet,
access,
non-advertised accesses to like an exclusive, quiet, rent stabilized deal where it's too good to be true. Because there's definitely like a hidden marketplace.
yeah, you need to know brokers who are tapped in with a lot of renters and
Yeah, it's a very short
and
shoulder. It happens a
it
lot
might
in
take
the
longer to rent them, but again, if you're going to save that upfront cost, especially on an apartment where there's no increase or minimal,
yeah. So people are going to look for people looking for bang for
this
buck
could
and
actually
like
make the rent stabilized apartments more expensive, surprisingly enough. The
in
upfront
like
cost.
the upfront cost.
If an
There
owner,
might be something going on with broker fees on rent stabilized. Well below market rents that an owner still does piecemeal work to finish off, to renovate, or to do any kind of cosmetics to the bare minimum, everything, but somebody just wants a good deal and a good location.
Yeah, so that'll be an interesting.
I've
That'll
seen
be very
tenants
interesting.
renovate apartments that were good priced,
Oh yeah, I've seen them gut renovate the whole place themselves. It's crazy.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's worth it if your rent's $3,000 below market and you're going to be there for 50 years.
Yeah, it's definitely worth it if you're going to be there, you're going to use it, but forget about we're not condoning tenants doing
Pretty
construction.
much a land lease with just a great rent term.
Yeah, it's one way to think about it.
Almost.
Yeah,
But
well, it's an interesting time. I mean, this is going to shake things up a little bit. I think condos, free market, co-op rentals, the sponsor rental product that we've done a lot of for other co-ops and condo owners. I think that those will go relatively unchanged. It's business as
Yeah, the pricing
usual.
will just go up a little bit,
The
and it
pricing
is what
will
it is.
tick up if the market will support it. And if it
I mean,
doesn't,
look, pricing will uptick a tiny bit, and then the brokerage fees won't be the 15%, right? It'll get
right,
down to 1 month, 7.5%, whatever it may be.
right,
And
exactly.
then you'll see, like, you never know. Like, it could get to the Wild West where there are brokers who like keep undercutting everybody. Hey, I'll give you a flat rate of, $1,000 an apartment, right? And
People will do that.
you know how that goes though. It's the marketing cost gets expensive and the time going there back and forth. And you'll start to see you can only get it so cheap and split the pie so many different ways until someone's disincentivized to go, rush and take two subways and spend 45 minutes each way to get somewhere to go show an apartment.
That's the
So
part about like the logistics of what we deal with that people don't seem to like calculate all the time. Like it took a bunch of work to go to and from a location to be
there's
prepared
some
for it.
though, I'll be honest,
Like,
there's some that's why I think it also, like, for a landlord, it makes more sense for them to pay, right? Because I'll be honest, there's some apartments that I do and I do two showings and I rent it, right? And it's easy peasy, right? And then
yeah,
there's others where I'm, overseeing the construction for them and I'm renting the apartment and we're doing, 50 showings and out of the 50 showings, I've got 10 applications that I process and half of them are terrible. So it's a balancing act. And I get it. Some of the renters get pissed off because they're like, oh, I just paid you, you know, $3,000 for, 2 hours worth of work or whatever it may be. Right. But they don't see what goes on the back end. So
yeah,
I think this shift will be good. Um, and like you said, I think this will shake out a lot of and I hate to say it, excuse my French, but a lot of the shitty brokers who don't provide value, right? Who are just overcharging because they can. And I think you'll lose a lot of those brokers, and that's it. I
yeah.
do. I think
People
this
are
is
going to
best
change
for
up.
everybody. I think people will move around a little bit more, which will create more activity for the brokers who are in the business. And I think it's healthy. I do.
Do you think this is going to affect the amount of housing stock available? You think this would
On
affect?
market, on market, yes, but I'll tell you this too, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. I know for a fact, right? We deal with a
Mhm.
lot of people that call us and we call them for off market stuff, opportunities all the time.
Right.
Um, I think that's what it is. I think it's the brokers who know the areas. I think people will start looking for more hyper local brokers who know people in the neighborhood who live there, who, you know, can find things off market and source them if they're to get around these fee issues and stuff. And I think those are the ones who will survive.
Open listings are gonna make a comeback, I have a feeling.
Yeah,
Open
I mean,
listings that are shoulder to shoulder, not advertised anywhere, no central
of
marketing.
course.
I think that's gonna make a big comeback and like people are gonna have like it's gonna be like a bespoke thing. You know what I mean?
It's also
People,
having a good relationship with the people you've rented to in the past. You know how many times I've got
yeah,
calls from tenants or texts who are like, "Hey, I love my building. I got a friend or colleague or whoever it is looking. Do you have anything open for them?" And I'm like, "This is great. I have a qualified lead. Don't even need to go to market ahead of time. It's perfect. It'll minimize the turnover. It'll minimize everything for everyone. Perfect scenario." So I think things like that will work, right? And I
mhm,
think a scenario like that too, a landlord might say, "Hey, let me calculate, and it's off market, it's kosher, right? Because they're hiring Mike, they're calling him to see if he has anything, right? Not
yeah.
calling about a listing." And I think if the paperwork's there and they're willing to sign something, that's the biggest thing.
It's funny. Like I may be spilling some sauce here, but like I feel like this is a great time for real estate professionals like us to probably own a little bit of rent stabilized and operate the damn things. Because think about it, we trade in a skill that is conducting transactions. It's not effort for us. It's not painful. All right, like who knows?
It depends though. The stabilized units don't move that frequently, especially the ones with like cheap rents.
Yeah, but it's so easy to fill them. You can just, you
No,
know,
of course, but think about it, you go buy a 6-unit building, and let's just say the average rent in the neighborhood's 2,500 and everyone in your building's paying 1,200. What are the chances of them moving out? It's either, usually death or injury or sickness or unforeseen issues. And
yeah, true.
even on
Good
six
point.
units, right, it's hard. I'm talking like the bigger groups who've, like the pinnacle groups, right? They got
Right.
thousands of the units
Oh my
and
God. Yeah.
at any point they could probably have a few dozen that turnover, right? That's that's bigger. I think there's upside on that for them on leasing, but it's going to be interesting, and
It's going to be
I
a
think it's good
shakeout.
for I think it's good for renters. And we'll leave it off with this. If anyone's buying, renting, selling in New York, New Jersey, our team
Call
can
us.
help you guys. Yeah. If you ever need a resource, want to bounce ideas, learn
Are we
about what's
touching
going on
Florida
in the
soon?
market. I think Rebecca's licensed there.
Yeah. All right. Because
I know the
we need to
I know
start
Adam.
touching
I
on it
know
a little
Adam
bit.
opened up an office there for the firm, so I think things can
Yeah.
happen there
I'm
too.
getting my spidey senses tingling that occasionally there's going to be some opportunities to circle around over there. So having our hand in the cookie jar there could be useful. But anyways, conversation for another time. Episode 3 in the books, I would say, unless you had something you wanted to talk about.
No, we're good.
Rock and
I think
roll and
we hit
short and
every
sweet.
touch point on the Fair Act. I
That's
hope
it,
that was
man. That's
helpful.
it.
If you have any additional questions, leave a comment at the bottom of the chat, or feel free to message
Yeah.
either of
Comment
us.
below what you think about the Fair Act. If you think it was just, if you think it was confusing, whatever honest opinions you have on it, I'd like to open up a discussion in the comments below. Mike and I will try to respond to everybody. Hopefully, there's people to actually respond to. And we'll do this again pretty soon. And we'll see you all in the next one. Thanks for coming in.